I am Sarah, and I survived a rapist. Back in days, when I was just 18 years old, me and the rest of my friends used to spend the weekend at an old abandoned factory in our town. It had the vibes any teenager would dream of. Lots of space to wander around, with tons of stuff to do with their old abandoned machines. And the best of it all is, it had electricity, so it wasn't that spooky factory as you'd think of it. Anyways, one day, we were all gathering there to play cards, and as I was getting ready for my turn, a creepy guy approached us. Let's call him Robbie. He was talking casually to my friends, so I assumed that they've met before. He had a pale white skin and a skin-shaved head, but what was more noticeable is that he had some fresh bruises on his face. He introduced himself to me. I told him my name is Sarah, and that I was 18 years old. And from that point, Robbie started showing his creepy side. I guess hearing that I was just 18 was as a green light to him to start approaching me. Anyways, after a few minutes, Robbie started an endless complaining about how much of a dumb bitch his girlfriend is, and how he came just to avoid being around her. But it was obvious to all of us that this pathetic man didn't break up with this girl because she was his only source of income and shelter. He was broke, and that was obvious. He also bragged about how he stole a knife from Walmart. He even tried to hand me the knife for some reason, but I totally refused to even touch it. Then he did what I never expected him to do. He politely asked me to get his phone off the charger. Sounds totally normal, right? That's what I thought, 'cause the moment I reached his phone, I figured out that he already had a notes app open, and it read,
"Hey, I know this sounds creepy, but I think we should totally date."
There was a whole paragraph after it, but I had enough at this point. He expected some sort of response, so I gave him one.
Oh no, I'm not really interested in a relationship.
"Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Still friends?"
Sure.
What was I supposed to say? I just couldn't say no to the guy who got a knife on him and has a fresh fighting bruise all over his face. Neither of my two friends heard our conversation, so I was stuck next to Robbie until our game session was over. During that time, I offered Robbie some candies. They weren't my favorite thing in the world, but the Dollar Tree nearby has good prices. He laughed and said to me,
"Food is the way to a man's heart. Are you trying to seduce me right now?"
You can say it's a joke and doesn't have any deeper meaning than that. But coming from a man like him just didn't seem right. And when I left the factory after the game session had ended, I told my friends what had happened. They believed me and told me he was kind of a weird guy. It was the last time I saw him in person, as after a month or so from that day, a girl from our school went missing. Then a week after, his face was all over the news. He was the kidnapper of the schoolgirl. And not just that, the investigations led to the fact that Robbie was not just kidnapping and raping the girls of our neighborhood, but he, in fact, used them as his pets. His own fucking pets. They even found a footage from his own home camera where he beats up a girl on the stairs. The same girl I used to see in the factory a few months ago, and thought she'd just move out of town. I guess the girlfriend he was talking about that day wasn't even a girlfriend, but just another girl he kept as a pet.
Back in days, visiting my grandparents few times a week was the norm for me. They lived in an old stinky house with an unfinished basement. And let me tell you, I never liked it down there. Something was off about it. Maybe the smell. Maybe how the place felt so small even though their house was relatively big. I have no idea. I still remember the last day I ever saw my grandma. And that's why I'm writing all of this. I have to let it out. It was a rainy, cold day, and right after sunset, My grandma asked me to help her in moving some stuff from the basement up to the garage. I didn't mind helping, even with all the chills that the basement gives me. But once we stepped foot into the basement ground, the doorbell rang. And of course, Grandma had to run upstairs immediately for the door, even though she knew how I felt about being down there by myself. Yet she gave no shit as usual. And now she is gone, and I am all by myself. I didn't move, and didn't even want to. Suddenly, the lights started to flicker and I started to hear noises. And not just usual noises, but the type of noise that sounds exactly like talking and whispering. And to be precise, it was coming from the basement storage room right next to me. And with little bit of attention to the whispering, I figured out whose voice was that. And that is the part that freaks me out the most. The voice sounded exactly like my grandma. I was confused as hell. How am I hearing her beside me, even though she just got upstairs right in front of my eyes? I didn't want to move an inch towards the voice, but my curiosity was unbearable to resist. I started moving towards the source of that voice. What's the worst thing that can happen? When I got to the storage door, the lights turned off in a blink. I wanted to run upstairs and just leave this house for good, but my legs froze in place. I heard my name again for the second time. My grandma's voice asking me to open the storage door to help her get out. And yes, I did it. And I regret it. I couldn't see anything as it was still pitch black, and couldn't hear anything but faint laughing that felt like forever. But then, the laughing stopped, and the lights turned back on in the basement. I felt a little bit better with the lights back on, but the downside is that I still couldn't see clearly inside the storage room, as my eyes were still adapting to the light. Few seconds later, I noticed a small clown doll inside the storage room. I wondered how the fuck this clown doll is even in here, as my grandma has a phobia of clowns in general. So why is this damn doll in here? I have no idea. Anyways, as I was still looking at the doll, the storage room lights turned on by itself, and the first thing that caught my attention was the extremely wet floor at the side of the room. It looked like blood, but I was not sure, simply because why the fuck would be all this blood here? It didn't make any sense. Suddenly, something moved inside the room. The steps kept getting closer. It's my grandma. She is smiling and want me to come closer. I screamed and immediately blacked out. The next thing I remember was laying on the couch in the living room, and my grandma looking at me and asking if I was okay. I had no idea if that was real or a dream, but it sure as hell felt real. I decided it was time to leave. I don't want to stay here any longer. While heading to door, I noticed something. Grandma's shoes were all covered in blood. And that was it. I don't remember much other than running like a maniac to my home across town. Next morning, we had a call from Grandpa telling us that Grandma is dead. She hanged herself in the basement that night. To this day, I live with utter regret. Some may say it's all in my head, and none of this even happened, or that she was just suffering from depression or something. But deep down inside, I know it was all because of me. Something was off with that voice behind the storage door, the same voice that led my grandma to hang herself up. All I can do is grieve out loud here from a burner account, till I have enough courage to end it all.
It was a rainy night.
The kind of nights where the harmony of the screaming crows are loud enough to cover on the claps of thunder. That night, I was driving my car back home. The rain was intense that I felt my car will stall anytime. But suddenly I saw something in front of me. I couldn't actually identify what was it. Maybe a deer. Maybe just a shadow of some sign. But it didn't take long till I realized what was there. It was just a little girl standing helpless in the middle of the road. Nobody else was driving around this area at that time. So I took a decision that came from heart. I will just pick up this girl and drive her home. Leaving her in the middle of nowhere isn't something I could be okay with. But is that a safe decision? I do not know, but I'm gonna do it anyways. I parked at the side of the road near her and invited her in. And without second thoughts, she jumped in the car. She thanked me in calm voice and told me her address. And that was the last thing I heard from her during the whole ride. She just kept staring out of the window. Once we arrived in front of her home, she got out of the car in the middle of the rain, and before heading to her house door, she thanked me again. And that was it. I took off and went on the road again, heading to my home. But after a few minutes of driving, I found out that she dropped her wallet by mistake. I decided to turn around and give her the wallet back. And since I didn't go so far from her home, it'll just take a few minutes. But as I was turning around, I lost control of the car. I would have rammed out of the road, but fortunately I avoided it at the last moment. I parked in front of her house and got off my car. The house looks old and frightening. To be honest, I was a little bit skeptical at first. But anyways, I banged on the door and stood waiting. An old woman opened the door for me. She looked around. Then she looked at the wallet before she said angrily,
"Can't you just leave me alone? You helped me 60 years ago, and every year you come back at the same night to handle me the wallet. It wasn't my fault you ran into a tree and died while getting back to me. I'm sick, and my brain cannot handle seeing a dead man's soul every 12 months. Please, leave me alone."
Then she shut the door off at my face. I stood at the door of the house, staring at her without a single clue what she is talking about. Then I just went back to my car and took off. And after a few minutes of driving, I noticed that the girl forgot her wallet in my car by mistake. I have to give it back to her. That was the content of the post I saw on one of the forums on Tor. I have no idea who the publisher of the post is, neither if it's true or not, as the publisher never got back online to the forum. So it's up to us to decide if it's true or not. What do you think? Leave your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell icon to receive the next stream before anybody else.
Let me start by saying, I don't like my school. Kids usually don't like school because they either hate to wake up early or just because they don't like to do their homework. But in fact, I hate school for a whole different reason. Mia and Sarah. Those bitches are the main reason behind my school trauma. And they'll tell you why. I have a medical condition. Doctors call it heterochromia iridium. And if you don't know what this shitty name even means, it simply means that I have a different color for each of my eyes. Not a big deal. That's what I thought. But Mia and Sarah found my condition good enough for bullying me over it every single day. They walk and say that my mom was in a hurry to give birth to me so that she can get back to the bar. So I was born incomplete. Pretty childish, I know, but it hurts, especially when the whole town knows that my mother is a pathetic alcohol addict. And that is the same reason that made my dad divorce her while I was just 2 years old at the time. My life was all about loneliness and suffering. But with all of that, I was not mad or anything. You can say I got used to my lifestyle. Anyways, I decided to visit my therapist today. Maybe he can help me with my bullying issue. Especially that the meds he prescribed earlier were damn expensive that I never had a chance to stay on them on schedule. I told him everything about Mia and Sarah, and once I finished talking, he was extremely surprised. Especially since it was the first time he hears about them, as the last time I visited him was before school starts, so basically he never heard about them until this moment. He immediately wrote something in his notes before he looked at me and asked if I really knew Mia and Sarah. I was confused by that question. What does he mean exactly? So I said, yeah, I know them quite well. He went silent for a few seconds before writing another note which I could not see. Then he asked me another question. He asked me if I first saw them while I was on my medicine or not. I told him that, in fact, I don't quite remember the first time I saw them. He smiled and said, "I was expecting this. Keep on the medication and we will see if they are real, or they're just from your imagination as a result of not taking your meds on a regular basis." And on the next month, I did exactly as he said. I saved some money and took my meds for the whole month. Want to know what happened? Mia and Sarah were completely gone, as if they were never there before, and fortunately I began to feel comfortable. I was genuinely happy. Until one day, I woke up to the sound of a hard knocking on the door of my house. There were 2 police officers, and I thought they came cause of any problem my mom caused through her usual overdrinking. But what happened was the exact opposite. They were coming for me. They said that they found 2 dead bodies in the woods. They were of 2 girls, Mia and Sarah. Beside the bodies, they found the knife in which they were killed by. And after comparing those fingerprints on the knife to our school student records, they found out that those fingerprints were actually mine. I got arrested for the murder of Mia and Sarah. I killed them. And honestly, I don't regret it.
One day I was surfing the deep web, and from 10th of stories I came up to one of them that is just unforgettable. And that particular story went as follows. It was New Year's Eve, and unlikely, the restaurant was very empty, and there was that girl. We had multiple eye contacts since I entered the restaurant, and for the first time in my life, I took the initiative and went ahead to shoot my shot with her, and luckily I was. She smiled and invited me to sit in for a drink. I pulled up the chair and sat down, saying, "I was afraid that you would be waiting for someone." She laughed as she said, "And I was waiting for you to make the approach." I laughed from my heart. She had a sweet sense of humor and her soul was sweet that it makes your heart melts. We spent nearly 2 hours talking. She asked me about the reason that made me spend the new year alone. I smiled and told her, "I do this every year. If I met someone nice, then it'll be a blessed year. If not, then it won't be a good one." Of course, I had to ask her the same question, and all of a sudden, the smile disappeared from her face while saying, "My husband." I asked her in astonishment, "Are you married?" She said to me sadly and broken, "I was married until he decided to let me go and run away with his secretary. He was cheating on me, and I knew it. I never thought that he'd actually run away and choose her over me." She drank a little more while we were still sitting, and in no time she started losing control of herself. Her voice kept getting louder and her laughter getting bigger. I grabbed her by her hand and we went out. I laid her on a chair in the bus station, waiting for any bus to show up so she can get back home. I tried to ask her for her address in order to stop a taxi for her, but she was overdrunk and could never remember any of those details to give. By this moment, I decided to take her back home with me, at least till she get a little bit better. I took her from her hand and we walked until we reached my car. I laid her in the back seat, then I drove and took the longer road in order to reach my home. I could have taken a shorter way, but this way is better and safer. I was lucky that my home is in an isolated part of the city, and this is fine. I don't want someone from the neighbors to ask me about her and why she's unconscious. We arrived home. She was asleep and completely unable to wake up. I had to go open the house door first and then go back to the car and carry her in. I woke up in the morning with her loud voice and continuous screams, and as I told you, I was lucky that there are no neighbors around. I opened the door to the basement and went down the stairs to see her. It turned out to be that when she woke up and found herself tied in the wall of my basement with chains, she was terrified. I saw her freaking out, not believing she's chained up and down to the wall. I said, "Good morning, sweetie." She shouted among her tears, "Who are you? And why are you doing this to me?" I wondered if I'm that much unremarkable to people. I met her yesterday, and she don't even remember me. I replied to her while keeping my smile. "My name is Damien. We met yesterday at the restaurant. You were staying up late by yourself and I came back to you." And before I continued, she interrupted me shouting, "I know how we met. I think I remember that. What I'm asking now is who are you?" My smile became wider when I said, "It's good. You shortened the distances to me. As I told you, my name is Damien, and I know your husband, and I know where he and his secretary disappeared." Her eyes widened in horror as she said, "Seriously, where? You must say." I laughed on her way before saying, "You are a very bad actress. You knew that your husband betrayed you with his secretary, and you tricked them in order to catch them red-handed in your house. And after that, you killed them and cut their bodies into parts. And lastly, you buried them in the forest." Which leaves me wondering how the police did not consider you as a main suspect in the case with that bad acting of yours. But in any ways, good job. You almost did a perfect crime. But unlucky you are that I'm here and I caught you. She angrily said to me, "He had to die. I sacrificed everything for him. I gave him everything and stood beside him until he became a successful person. It is not acceptable to be that my reward." I raised my shoulders indifferently as I said, "This is not justified, even if he betrayed you. It doesn't make him deserve to be killed." She stared at me for a minute, and then asked, "Are you a relative of John? A relative of Madeline, his secretary? Who are you?" I laughed from my heart as I said, "I am neither this nor this. I'm just a journalist obsessed with solving crimes that are tying up against an unknown. A genius, and using my gift to achieve justice." She asked me in fear, "Will you hand me over to the police?" I laughed as I grabbed the knife that was on the table near me and said, "No. I am doing justice in my own way."
It all started back in 1974. When I was a successful journalist everyone wanted to be like. I was going back home after a long day of work, and all what I was thinking about was Richard Nixon, who was just airing his resignation this morning. They even gave us an allowance to leave work at 12 p.m. that day. But of course, I was from the unlucky bastards who had to stay for a full shift to cover the news. Anyways, while I was on my usual everyday path, I had a sense of something off going on, as there was a car following me from distance. But honestly, that driver was a stupid fucker to think that I won't hear him driving behind me. I tried walking a little bit faster, but he kept accelerating to catch up while maintaining the same distance between us. So, I took the decision. I stopped, turned around, and looked at him straight in the eyes. I was stupid, I know. Maybe if I just ran off instead of stopping, I wouldn't be locked up in a fucking cell later. Who knows? Anyways, as when I turned around to look at the guy following me, I simply found no guy. In fact, what I saw was an old lady. She smiled at me in the most friendly way you can imagine. She was a lot older of what I expected a night stalker to be. I felt I knew this woman from somewhere, but I just can't remember. She suddenly got out of her car and started approaching me in very slow steps. I hesitated, thought of walking away, running as fast as I could, but I just didn't. She kept walking until she was few steps away from me. "How are you, Smirky?" she said. And in case you don't know, Smirky was my nickname during my miserable childhood. And no, I wasn't terrified, cause at this point, I was sure this old woman is a boring old relative whom I don't have a memory of, just like the rest of my family. I prepared myself to some boring family conversation, but she didn't even wait for my answer. She patted me on the shoulder and told me to take care of myself and went on her way. Okay, that didn't go as I expected. She isn't a night thug thief or a weird stalker. She's just an old woman who seems to know me for ages. And if that's the case, why didn't she just came over to say hi the moment she saw me, instead of just following me from a distance like a weirdo? A few minutes later, I was home, just to find that my dad and my stepmother were brutally murdered. I tried saving them as much as I can, took out the knife from Dad's chest, but that didn't help. I was in shock. I kept on crying and screaming like a maniac. And the next thing I remember is the police cuffing me out of the house. And not just that, they even accused me of murdering my own family. No matter how much I tried to explain what really happened, no one believed me. Till that one day.
Hey Sam, you have a visitor.
I went out to attend the visit session for the first time since I came to this filthy place. It's her, the old woman I met that other day.
Hi, sweetie. I know you don't know me, and I bet you've tried to. But I just know you will never remember me. I'm your mom's sweetheart. I know your dad had told you I was dead since you were a kid. But the truth is, he did that to protect you from me, your drunk mom who had an extreme drinking issues. And after I was arrested a couple of times, we got divorced, and your dad had took you by court orders. And yes, I'm the one who killed him in his whore. All I wanted from him was to see you in person and to tell you that I was alive. Your mom is alive and waiting for you. But he and his wife treated me as if I was a beggar, a worthless human that doesn't even deserve to live at all. I don't want you to worry, sweetie. I'll get you out of here tonight. I'll leave my apartment door open so they can find my dead body probably by the morning. I'll leave a recorded tape by me. This tape will be more than enough for the police to set you free and convict me for the murder you're accused of doing. All I wanted is to see you before I leave, and I'm sorry for everything.
It was our third date when Samantha decided to confront me with the truth, when she suddenly stated that there's something I need to know. So, here it comes. She'll probably friend zone me right now. I gave her the green light to go ahead. Then she said the most awkward shit ever. She simply said that she have a removable face. And honestly, that was a new one. I was about to laugh, but she was wearing a deadly serious expression. So I had to ask if that was a metaphor or something. She stared at me for a few seconds. Then she lifted her chin and traced her jawline with a finger and asked me to look closely. It was very hard to see, but she was right. I saw a tiny gap between her neck skin and her face. I mean, with her fucking fake face. She calmly instructed me not to ask any questions, as she can't tell me any details. And if that fake face thing is going to be a problem, then we should break up in peace and act as if we never met. And for me, 1 minute was fairly enough to make a decision. Not a problem. So what? You have a removable face. Who cares? It looks good.
There's something else. Once a day, usually in the evening, I have to remove the face and disinfect the inside of the mask. Because if I don't, it will rot. This takes about an hour, depending on how my day went. During this time, you must never ever look at my real face. Do you understand?
I nodded positively. Honestly, I was still in shock of the fucking weird situation I was going through. Maybe she had had a horrible accident where her flesh had been mangled. Maybe her face had been melted by acid or burned by fire. I don't know. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I was picturing a face of raw, naked muscle rotting away. What if I wanted to kiss her? Will I be really kissing her? Or just kissing the bloody and squishy skin under her fucking mask? 7 months have passed now, and yes, we're still together. And you know what? I'm deeply in love with this girl. We just kept dating. Then Samantha moved into my humble house, and the best of it all, we decided to get married. And for the most part, it was a completely normal relationship, typical of two young people in love, building a life together. During the day, it was easy to forget about the face altogether. It looked natural enough for me. I did occasionally ask her about it, how it was possible to make the removable face look so real, and what it really looked like underneath. I tried to coax her into showing me, but she never showed me or told me the story behind it. She'd just shrug and say that she can't show me or tell me anything about her face for my own safety. I never told anybody about Samantha's removable face. It's not that she asked me not to. I just didn't think it was anybody's business. Except once, when I did tell somebody, my best friend, Chris. He laughed at first, thought I was shitting him into a dumb joke or something, but later on, he realized I was not joking. And of course, he proposed the most obvious thing ever. Why don't I pick on her? But he'll never understand how much I respect women in general, and how much I respect Samantha in particular. I shrugged it off, then we started falling back to other topics for the night. And before we head home, we planned on spending the weekend at my house. That night, all three of us were having a good time in the backyard. Then out of a sudden my boss called, so I excused them. 10 minutes later, I heard the screams coming from inside the house. Both my best friend and my wife were screaming in terror. I dropped the phone and ran into the house and down the hall to our bedroom. Through the open door, I could see that the door to the master bathroom was wide open. Then I heard Samantha screaming at me to not come in.
He looked. He fucking looked.
She kept saying he looked. Apparently Chris peeked from the door at Samantha, and what he saw made him scream hysterically. Suddenly Chris picked up his keychain and started stabbing his car key into his eyes, till what's left of his eyes had fallen off his face, leaving a leaking eye holes of blood and emptiness. He was clearly in the depths of madness, and it turned my stomach to see him mutilate himself.
What are you staring at? Call a fucking ambulance right now. And don't come here. Just don't.
I turned and ran back to the side yard, where my phone was lying in the grass. I noticed that my boss was still on the line. Maybe he was curious to know what caused all this screaming he was hearing. Anyways, I hung up on him and immediately called 911 when the paramedics arrived. Chris was having a seizure in the hallway until they took him away. Afterwards, Samantha kept sobbing. Her face was on, but it had been quickly done, and everything looked a little off. My world has been dark this past week. My best friend is in a psychiatric hospital under suicide watch. He's completely blind and mostly catatonic, except when he slips into a violent babbling mania. The doctors are optimistic that his state is temporary, but they don't know the truth about what caused it. Because I told the paramedics that Chris had taken a large dose of psychedelic mushrooms and fallen into psychosis, I saw no good reason to tell the truth about what had happened. Who would believe that one look at my wife's real face would make somebody insane? They'd probably put me in the room next to Chris if I ever said something like this. Anyways, since that day, Samantha is in a state of her own. She still cleans the inside of her face, though not as regularly, and when she puts it back on, it's always crooked. It has even started to smell a little bit. I've tried to assure her that it wasn't her fault, but she never gave me any reaction. She was mentally isolated from everything. As for me, I am doing my best to hold it together. Maybe Samantha is cursed. Maybe Chris was in fact on some sort of drugs and he was hallucinating what he saw. I have no idea. But do you know what's strange? Despite what happened to Chris, I still find myself curious about what my wife's real face looks like. When my sister Sarah and I were kids, our family lived for a while in a charming old farmhouse. We loved exploring its dusty corners and climbing the apple tree in the backyard. But our favorite thing was a ghost. We called her Mother, as she seemed so kind and nurturing. Some days, Sarah and I would wake up, and on each of our nightstands, we'd find a cup that hadn't been there the night before. And back then, we just thought she wanted to care of us by putting a cup of water in the room, in case we got thirsty or something. And among the home's original furnishings was an antique wooden chair, which we kept against the back wall of the living room. And whenever we were there, watching TV or playing a game, Mother would move that chair forward, across the room, toward us. Sometimes she'd manage to move it all the way to the center of the room. We always felt sad putting it back against the wall. Mother just wanted to be near us. that's all. Years later, long after we'd moved out, I found an old newspaper article about the farmhouse's original occupant, a widow. She'd murdered her 2 children by giving them each a cup of poisoned milk before bed. Then she hung herself. The article included some photos of the farmhouse's living room, and one of the photos had a woman's body hanging from a beam. And beneath her was that old wooden chair, placed exactly in the center of the room. This story happened back in 1972. I was out enjoying the night of Halloween when suddenly my legs started to hurt like hell. But thankfully, my house was very nearby, so I simply called it a day and just headed home. And back home, I found that my dad was about to leave for a night off with his folks. So in minutes, I was left totally by myself. An hour later, I was laying on the couch eating some candy, when suddenly my body went numb and I couldn't move. Then, my vision started looking weird, kind of wavy with very contrasted colors. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. I was left in this nightmarish state for quite few minutes before I was suddenly able to move my head again. I was looking around the room when I saw a tall figure, walking very slowly in the living room. The figure didn't want to scare me or anything. It was simply moving slowly towards the door as if it was invisible to everyone else. Then, it all ended. Simple as that. And I was able to move my whole body again. I told my mom about it later along with a few of my friends. And of course, nobody believed me. If any of you have any good explanations on why this happened, please tell me. I live in a town that is known to be fairly safe, and honestly, I always felt comfortable walking alone, until one day. It was during the clown craze. I was enjoying my daily walk as usual, and even though there were rumors that some of those clown freaks will be at my town, I honestly didn't give a shit and barely believed the news. That day, I was walking to the library to return some books when I saw a man dressed as a clown staring at me across the street. And in no time he started laughing and started moving slowly towards me. I was horrified, and in a glimpse he started running fast towards me. All I could do was try to run away. My brain couldn't process the situation as everything happened so freaking fast. I was so scared I couldn't even scream while running away from him. And as I was already close to the library, I headed to it instantly and literally jumped through the door. And when I finally got myself inside it, I looked behind, and he was standing in front of the door. He didn't have enough balls to get in there, especially after chasing an underage kid across the street. He started laughing like a maniac for a few seconds before he simply ran away of sight. Even though this incident happened a long time ago, I never had the courage to tell anyone about it, as I was mentally unprepared for anyone disbelieving what I went through. He was probably just a sick freak who took advantage of the clown's trend to do whatever he wanted under a mask. From all of my heart, I hope he's burning in hell for real.